Hello, Prairie Creek. Well, it's Sunday again, and we're continuing in our series of sermons from the book of Romans, The Righteousness of God Revealed. And as I've been thinking about the text we're looking at this week, it's made me think about my own marriage. I love Ellie, and one of the things that really makes my life amazing is when she smiles at me. When Ellie looks at me and I can see that she delights in me. That is one of the most precious things I have in my life. And it just makes my day. You know what I hate? I hate when she is upset with me. And believe me, I give her plenty of reason to do that. But I hate it. Even when I know it's all my fault and it's me, I do not like it at all. And I've found, we are 28 years into this marriage, I have found that Ellie gives me measures of mercy and wrath. As I look back on it, I realize just how important both of these things have been to me. I think if all I got from my wife was just unquestioning approval no matter what I'm doing, I don't think I'd be the man I am today. And when I do the wrong thing and she confronts me about it, that has been a part of the process in my whole adult life that has made me the man I am today. I wouldn't be the man I am today if God had not given me a wife that both loves me and shows approval of me and disapproval when that is what I need. And I think that question of wrath and mercy is really the issue Paul is addressing in the passage we're going to be looking at today. We're in Romans chapter 9, verses 14 through 29, and I've titled today's message, God of Wrath and Mercy. And hopefully we can realize as we're working through this passage that it's really not fair of us to expect God to only deal out mercy and to never do anything in terms of wrath. So let's dive right in, verses 14 through 18. What then will we say? There is no unrighteousness in God, is there? Absolutely not. For he says to Moses, I will show mercy to whomever I show mercy, and I will have compassion on whomever I have compassion. So then, it is not about the person who wills it, or the one who runs, but about God being merciful. For the Scripture says to Pharaoh, for this very purpose I raised you up, so that I might show my power in you, and so that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. So then, he shows mercy to whomever he wills, but he hardens whomever he wills. So Paul has been talking about God rejecting people that were actually physical descendants of Israel. And he's actually, in the passage immediately before this, been showing how that's been the pattern from the very moment he started things with Abraham. Out of 8 sons of Abraham, God only chose to work with Isaac. Out of the 2 twin sons of Isaac, God only chose to continue working with Jacob. And Paul has been arguing that God has always excluded people that you would have thought were already because Paul argues, God is basing his choosing and his receiving and accepting of people into his own family, not based on works or merits, not based on achievements or accomplishments, not based on what they bring to the table, the flesh, but based on what he has promised and the fact that he is calling people to himself. And I believe the first 8 chapters of Romans are basically Paul laying out this is God's calling to humankind, his invitation. So he bases receiving or rejecting people on that. And Paul continues here saying, so what should we say about this? Would we suggest that God is unrighteous? And here it isn't just about right or wrong, but that is the way God has defined himself to Israel, as the righteous one. And Paul is kind of asking, is God betraying his own character? The things he has said about himself, is he failing to keep that? And Paul responds from the very beginning, denying this. Absolutely not. And he quotes what God said to Moses. And this is when Moses was talking to God and said, God, show me your glory. And God said, I will pass before you and I will reveal my glory to you, although I'll have to cover you. You can't bear to view it fully. But in that moment, God says to Moses, I will show mercy to whomever I show mercy, and I will have compassion on whomever I have compassion. God lets Moses know from the very beginning that God is merciful, that he is compassionate, and that he alone is going to determine how that mercy and compassion is implemented. And so Paul says, so here's the way it works. It's not about the person who wills it. It's not about willpower. It's not about what we want from God. And let me say, there is a very common way in which faith is misrepresented within the Christian church as willpower. And some people think of faith as kind of a battle of wills with God, and all you have to do is want it bad enough, and you can bend God to your will. That's not faith, that's willpower. And being willful when it comes to God accomplishes nothing. Faith is trust. So Paul says it's not about what a person wills, what a person wants to see happen. It's not about the one who runs. It's not about what you accomplish through your efforts and where you get by running somewhere and doing something. It's not about what we have done. It's not about what we want. It's about God being merciful. God's the one who is meting out this mercy. And it's up to him. It's not up to us. And here's the thing I think we need to realize about this. And we might think, well, that doesn't sound right. I'll have mercy on whomever I want to have mercy, and I'll have compassion on whomever I want to. He should have mercy on everybody. Well, here's the thing about mercy. There are no regulations on mercy. Mercy is giving something undeserved. So right off the bat, all the cards are in the hand of the person extending mercy. The person on the other end, the person who has offended, has no right to demand anything. By its very definition, mercy is unregulated and wholly in the hands of the person extending the mercy. So it is absolutely right for God to say, I alone get to decide who I give my mercy to and who I don't. And that makes sense. Mercy can't be demanded. Mercy is a gift. And the person who gives the gift decides who he's going to give it to. It's not up to anybody else. And Paul continues pointing out what Scripture says to Pharaoh. God says he has raised Pharaoh up for a purpose so that he could show his power in Pharaoh and so that his name might be proclaimed in all the earth. So even with people whom God rejects in terms of extending his mercy to them, God is working in a way that is merciful in the broad picture of things. What is God trying to do with Pharaoh? He's trying to demonstrate to the world that he is the true power. Pharaoh raises himself up as this great power and claims divinity. But God, by humbling Pharaoh publicly, makes clear to the world that he is the true sovereign God. And He wants His name to be heard throughout the earth and for people the world over to know who He is. Why? We've already seen in Paul's discussion of the gospel that God makes Himself known to people throughout the world so that they may turn to Him and recognize Him as their Creator and turn to Him in reverence and honor Him as He deserves. So God is working through Pharaoh not just to punish him for his wickedness, but to extend mercy to the whole world so that they can find the truth and see through the lies they've been told. These people claiming to be God are not God. There is a true God who is above that all. And He is the one we should be focusing our hearts on. God is always trying to draw people to Himself. And even in the people He's rejecting to show, He's refusing to give mercy to, God is using that in a way to extend mercy. I have a question from these first verses. Do you think God should show mercy? Why or why not? Let's keep on reading verses 19 through 24. You will say to me then, why then does He still find fault? For who has ever resisted His intent? Oh, human, quite the contrary. Who are you to answer back to God? Does the thing formed say to the one forming it, why did you make me this way? Or does the potter not have authority over the clay to make out of the same lump, on the one hand, a vessel for honor, on the other hand, one for dishonor? But what if God, wanting to exhibit wrath and to make known how powerful He is, bore with much patience the vessels of wrath that had been prepared for destruction, so that He could also make known the riches of His glory upon vessels of mercy, which He prepared beforehand for glory? Those whom He also called, us, not only from the Jews, but also from the Gentiles. So Paul doesn't just talk about God having mercy. And here's the thing, God has every right to extend His mercy any way He sees fit. That is His gift to give. We can't demand it, and we can't say to Him, oh, well, that's wrong. No, a gift is a gift. Nobody gets to regulate that. But wrath is a little different. We assume that a gift is unmerited. A gift cannot be demanded, but wrath is merited, right? Otherwise, it's wrong. But wrath as a right response to a genuine offense is right. It is the appropriate response to people when they behave wickedly. But Paul envisions an objection here. So you might say, so why does God count anybody at fault? I mean, if He's going to start extending mercy, why not just give it to everybody and then nobody can complain that they didn't get it? Who has ever resisted what He intended to do, what He willed to do? Who has ever opposed what God designed to do and successfully resisted Him? So, and here's the thing, right? If God's going to extend mercy, He should give it to everybody. Why should He count anybody guilty? If He's going to let some people off the hook, shouldn't He let everybody off the hook? Paul answers this, but before he really gets around to answering it, he tries to remind his readers of our position in this debate. First of all, he says, who are you to answer back to God? We don't like to hear that. We don't like to hear that it is not our place to question God. We like to think that it is our place to question anything we jolly well please to question. And don't you dare question me about that. That's our attitude. But Paul says, if God is the Creator, God has made us, then consider when we do something similar to that. Consider a potter who takes a lump of clay. And that's a great image, because the way the Bible describes the creation of man is that God created man from the dust of the earth and breathed life into him. So imagine a potter. He takes a lump of clay. Doesn't he have the right to make whatever he wants out of that lump? In fact, out of the very same lump, can't he make one thing for some glorious, really intricate and special purpose, and another thing for some really not glorious purpose? Can't he make something to put on the dining table at a very special occasion, and from the same lump make something to spit in? Isn't it the potter's right to make whatever he wants out of his clay? And here's the thing, when we want to force God to do the same thing with all of us, we are saying, you can only do one thing with us. Paul's saying, first of all, when did the clay get a say in this? When did the clay earn the right to turn to the one who is making him and say, why are you making me like this? Who are we to question God? Who are we to tell God, you have no right to show mercy to that person? Who are we to tell God, you have no right to pour your wrath out on that person? Who are we to tell God, you can only make vessels of mercy. You can only make vessels for glory. Why? And why would that be right for us to demand that of God? And here's what Paul says. Think about it. What if? What if? What if mercy wasn't the only thing God needed to show? In fact, what if before mercy made any sense, God had to show us wrath? What if wrath is necessary for mercy to even make sense? What if God needed to show His wrath, needed to exhibit it, put it on public display, so that we would realize He is the one in charge and He hates evil and punishes wickedness? Don't you think we need to know that? What if He wanted to do this, and in order to do that, He, with much patience, bore the vessels of wrath? So Paul is saying there are human beings that are vessels of wrath. Their destination is to become recipients of the wrath of God. That's their purpose. And he talks about God with great patience bearing with their presence. And here's the thing, you might wonder this about God. Why we look around the world and see atrocious things happening. Why does God put up with that? If He really hates it as much as we do, and if the Bible's right that He didn't just hate it as much as we do, He hates it more than we do. Why does He put up with it? Why doesn't He just wipe them off the face of the earth the moment they do some atrocious thing? Well, Paul says that God is showing patience on these vessels of wrath, which have been prepared for destruction. In other words, the fact that God is patient doesn't mean He's not going to bring the hammer down. It doesn't mean there's not going to be a consequence to this wickedness and this evil. That destruction is coming. But Paul says God's patience in allowing these vessels of wrath to still be around is that He could also make known the riches of His glory upon vessels of mercy. Why does God tolerate wicked people to continue living? And here's the thing. If we look back at Paul's letter and see what he argued in the first 3 chapters of Romans, we realize that the vessels of wrath is all of us. when he talked about wrath in chapters 1 through 3, he showed how God's wrath falls on Gentiles, how God's wrath falls on Jews, how God's wrath falls on everybody, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We have all messed up. We are all worthy of God's wrath, and we receive God's wrath upon us, but God in patience bears with our wicked presence. We are an offense to our Creator because we have rejected Him and turned to our own ways, and we have willfully chosen our own path rather than honoring Him as only He deserves from us. And yet God tolerates this because of mercy. His patience is the space He allows so that His mercy can step in and redeem. That's where the gospel message comes in. It's in that period of God's patience on vessels of wrath, which we all are. And in that period of patience on vessels of wrath, He is able to make known the riches of His glory upon vessels of mercy. A person can switch from being a vessel of wrath to a vessel of mercy. That is the gospel message. That is the good news. You're not stuck in that because God has chosen to show His patience so that wrath is not the only thing we discover about Him, but so that His wrath, by extending that period, allows us room to find His mercy. And if vessels of wrath are prepared for destruction, vessels of mercy are prepared for glory. And who are these? Those whom He called, and Paul says. I'm talking about us, guys. And it doesn't matter what our background was, not just from Jews, but from Gentiles, from all of us. God has brought us together and turned us from vessels of wrath into vessels of mercy. And here's the thing, God needed to show both, because His mercy would make no sense if we didn't know there was wrath. If we didn't know we were utterly ruined and destined for destruction, then the mercy He extends in the gospel would mean nothing to us. It would be empty. It would be a pointless gift. I have another question from these verses. Do you think God should show wrath? Why or why not? And let's finish reading the passage, verses 25 through 29. As He also says in Hosea, I will call those who are not my people, and those who have not been loved, loved. And it will be that in the very place where it was said to them, you are not my people, there they will be called sons of the living God. But Isaiah cries out for those of Israel, though the number of the sons of Israel might be as the sand of the sea, only the remnant will be saved. For the Lord, carrying this out and cutting it short, will do this upon the earth. And just as Isaiah foretold, if the Lord of armies had not left behind offspring to us, we would have become like Sodom, and we would have been made like Gomorrah. So Paul kind of, as he's wont to do, ties it all together, that God is showing both wrath and mercy on Jews and Gentiles. And he's almost even evening the balance, because especially since the return from the exile, the way the Jews have been trying to deal with the problem of idolatry is isolationism. They just form their closed communities, and they are the people of God, and they worship God and let all the pagans around them go on about their business. One of the tragedies of the post-exilic Jewish community is that they lost their missionary purpose in the calling of God. But Paul is saying God is showing His wrath and mercy in a way that kind of evens the balances, right? First of all, he talks about the Gentiles, those who would have been excluded from the nation of Israel and were largely, completely excluded from the people of Israel. There were God-fearing Gentiles who would come near to the synagogues, and you could become a proselyte and undergo circumcision to become a Jew through that process. But really, people just didn't do that. And the Jews weren't terribly keen on trying to accomplish that from the Gentiles. They were largely excluded. And yet, Paul quotes these words from Hosea, and Hosea is talking about the northern tribes of Israel and how they have been unfaithful. They have been spiritually adulterous in their marriage to Yahweh because they have been worshiping other gods. And God finally says, I'm done. I'm going to withdraw my favor from you, and I'm going to let the Assyrians come in and take you off into exile and destroy your land. And he's going to reject them. They're no longer going to be called my people. They're going to be not my people. They're not going to be called loved. They're going to be called not loved, because that's what's going to happen to them. And yet, in Hosea, God gives him a vision of what God's going to do after this happens. God's not going to utterly reject them. Even after they have been rejected and excluded and not loved, He's going to return to them and draw them back. And Paul believes that this is a principle that applies more broadly than just in the case of the exile of the northern tribes in Israel. It applies to the way God deals with humankind in general. He loves to draw in the outcast, the rejected, the excluded, the not my people, the not my Gentile, not my nation, not my people, and the one who has not known my love. And Paul sees this as applying to the Gentiles, that God has drawn in with the preaching of the gospel. He has drawn in people who had not known about God's love, had not known themselves this identity as we are the people of God. And that had been extended to them in the gospel. And there's kind of the reverse has been happening with Israel. And he quotes Isaiah to point that out. That Isaiah talks about God bringing judgment on Assyria, which has, in Isaiah's day, has attacked and taken captive the northern tribes of Israel, and how God is going to judge Assyria and bring an end to this wicked empire. And he's talking about these tribes of Israel that Hosea was talking about and how they're going to be dragged off into exile. And Isaiah says that it doesn't matter how many the people of Israel might be, only the remnant is going to be saved. So God's not going to abandon Israel completely. There is a remnant, a small portion that He's going to retain, but the rest He's going to lose. And he quotes another one from Isaiah in his opening oracle in chapter 1. If the Lord of armies had not left behind offspring to us, we would have become like Sodom, and we would have been made like Gomorrah. In other words, if God had not chosen to leave us behind some people, we would have been utterly destroyed and wiped from the face of the earth. So Paul is arguing that we see now in what's going on in his day, a balancing in the gospel. That people who used to be completely excluded are finding themselves included in God's people. And people who had always thought they had it made and were already in the people of God, when the Messiah came and they rejected Him, have found themselves outside. And only a remnant of the people of Israel has remained within the people of God. Paul is arguing that God has every right to show both mercy and wrath, and that it is necessary for Him to show both of them. I have a question from this. Paul argues that it is right that God loves to include outcasts and feels free to exclude people of privilege. When it comes to God, would you identify with the excluded Gentiles or the privileged Jews in terms of your own background? What do you think of what Paul is saying? So we've reached the end of our passage. And I think this is a very timely topic because we live in a world where within the church there are rumblings and attempts to try to do away with the wrath of God. We don't like to think that God is angry against sin. And we want His mercy to just be this universal blanket that covers everything. But God makes it very clear that that is not the way things work. That there are two halves to this, and that for redemption to mean anything, for salvation to be a real thing, then condemnation has to be a real thing. There has to be a way in which God can extend mercy in a right way. And I would suggest to you that the gospel is that right way. If God were to blanket everyone with His saving grace, then everyone, whether they want to or not, would eventually be free from sin. That means if you like adultery, then there would come a point where that is no longer an option for you. If you like murder, if you like being cruel, if you like being self-centered and living only focused on yourself, if you like being prideful, if these are the things that you truly devote your heart to, then God would be saying, well, I don't care what you want. I am going to burn that out of you. I'm going to get rid of that, and you're going to become righteous. We all think that wouldn't be fair for God to just do that to everyone, whether they want it or not. Now, as Creator, He has the right. He could do that. He's Creator. We're creatures. We are the clay. He could do anything He wants with us. But don't you think it's right that God should say, okay, I am going to show the reality of who I am. I am full of wrath against sin, but I am full of love towards humankind. I want to show both of these things. So I will prepare two destinations for human beings. Some will be destined for glory, some will be destined for destruction. Some will be destined for mercy, some will be destined for wrath. And here's how I'm going to decide who goes where. The gospel. I am going to extend a promise. I am going to extend an invitation. I'm going to call everyone on earth to come and willingly say, I want to be rescued from sin. I want to be free from it. Those who want it will receive it. It doesn't matter your background, whether you are a Gentile or a Jew, whether you have a religious upbringing or don't, whether you know how to pray and know the Bible or have no clue about it. It doesn't matter. God extends the same offer to us all. And it's not about what you want. It's not about how hard you run. It's about how you answer to His invitation. My prayer for you today is that you answer with a resounding, yes, Jesus, take all of me. Do the glorious things only you can do with me, and I surrender everything I have and am, my future, my dreams, my hopes. I put it all in your hands. God, take me. My prayer for you is that is who you are today. God bless you.